Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. And in this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, politics, sport, and everything else we're talking about. If you like this interview, and even if you like subsequent interviews, please remember to like, subscribe, and share, and all that good stuff. So today's guest is a history student at Trinity College Dublin and has written for publications including Critic and UnHerd. She writes on Substack at Insider Basbøll and co-hosts the Reading Room podcast. I don't know if I've missed anything out there because it's quite a long list. We're here to talk today about her letter of liberty she wrote for the Battle of Ideas, which is called, if I can get it down, The Tyranny of Campus Wellbeing. Her name is Felice Basbøll. She's here to join me now. Hello, Felice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. A long list there. As I said, I hope I've not missed anything out there at all. So it's quite a long piece. But first of all, like I said, I've included that there. Can you just do a small introduction to yourself as well? Like, how did you get into writing this letter of liberty and where your interests lie with regards to your writing?
Well, I guess I'm Danish originally, and I came to university in Dublin around 4 years ago. And I guess I kind of got into writing and thinking about what university was and what it was missing and what was wrong with it. And I think one of the first things you notice when you come onto university is this kind of pastel colored well-being bureaucracy that constantly that is kind of always there to mediate any issues. You have kind of suicide prevention banners on the backsides of toilets and that kind of stuff. And I guess I kind of got in. I came to the Battle of Ideas for the first time when I was in my first year of university, and then I've sort of been to the Battle of Ideas the 4 years since then, and I guess done a bit of work for them, and they then asked me to write this letter on liberty on that whole kind of campus well-being culture and well-being bureaucracy that I think really is the defining feature of university life. We can get back to that, but there are many theses on what is the thing that is wrong in universities, and I think I would really put my finger on that as the main thing.
Okay, so obviously I've read the letter of liberty. I enjoyed it. I read it in one read. It was a very nice flow to it, very easy to understand for myself. But going on the subject matter, why do you think this has occurred with regards to this mental well-being amongst certainly university students? Because it's something that's been mentioned for a number of years now, and it almost seems to have come out of nowhere. Is it specifically university students, or is it young people in general?
I think it's something that's definitely a broader phenomenon than just universities. I think it really started, or it became kind of more prevalent around the 90s, where you started to have, I guess, a kind of scare about the relationship between professor and student and the authority, the power dynamics between in those situations, and there became a real focus on the student, not just as a person who's there to learn, but a person who needed to be taken care of by the university itself. And this kind of changed who has the power within the university system and how the dynamics work. But I then also think that it's kind of sped up in recent years because of the so-called mental health crisis that we talk about in all sorts of other situations, related to social media, related to other things that surveys and stats are increasingly showing that young people self-report higher and higher rates of mental ill health, and sort of anxiety, depression, these kinds of things. And I think the universities have just sort of taken it upon themselves to solve this, and they do this through this increasingly ramped up messaging around mental health and counselling and extension policies and everything you can think of that the universities think will make life easier for the students.
So what's the university's motivation for doing that? Because surely as the adults in the room, shouldn't they be telling, and I say this as someone who's suffered mental health herself, and I don't mean a hurty word, I mean actually glazed eyes and whatnot. So I say it with that in mind, but shouldn't the adults actually be teaching the students or helping developing students to actually develop a tougher skin in that sense? But obviously from what you're saying they're not. So why is that? What is their motivation?
I think it is a kind of misunderstanding of what it is that students need. I think the kind of self-reported mental health problems are are taken very seriously by the university, not least because that kind of survey data goes into university rankings. That is how universities kind of market themselves to incoming students. The kind of student well-being, self-reported student well-being is very much part of what gives you higher rankings on various of these systems. So I think the universities are incentivized to do what the students want or do what the students say they want. So if a student, is struggling a bit with deadlines or so on, and they ask for an extension, for example, I think extensions is one of those things that's exploded in the last 10 years, people getting extra time to write essays and that kind of stuff. And professors don't really know how to say no because students think of it as kind of a right that if they are struggling, then they can get a few extra days and no one is really hurt by that. But I think what students actually need is a kind of structure. They need to know that there will be consequences if they don't hand in something on time, and they need to sort of learn to navigate that kind of thing over the course of their studies. But the universities seem to have misunderstood their role as just fulfilling what students ask for rather than thinking about how to give them the best possible education.
I first went to university as a student in 2000, and I went with a friend of mine at a time of our known since primary school, although we both did different courses. And obviously, we'd do the work, but we'd also go out, whether it's to a student union or a club, or just because I used to do karate as well. So he'd come with like dinners and whatnot. I used to mingle around people and whatnot. And I had a conversation with my friend last year because his niece goes to that same university now, said, and his niece said, oh, there's all different changes now. So they don't go clubbing as much. There's a city nearby from the university, which if they'd want to go out, they'd go there instead of the city. I said, well, I don't even go to house parties. And he said, no, like they just stay in the house all day. And obviously, the internet's a lot more prevalent now than it is then. And I mention his story because I had this before, but certainly with university, one of the things it does, it really does teach you independence and especially your social skills and mingling with people from different backgrounds and whatnot. Would it be fair to say that that's one element of university that's missing, and that might be a reason why? Because now you come up because you don't have a social skills, you come up to certain situations, you're like you don't know how to interact with people. Would that be a fair assessment to say?
Yeah, I mean, clearly a lot has happened with young people today, and we're drinking less, smoking less, having less casual sex. We're just generally a little bit sort of more timid and held back. More people report not having any close friends, and this definitely seems to be a function of the internet. I think the university looks at those numbers and thinks, oh, what we should do is kind of pull back, give them less work because then they have more time to socialize and they have more time to go out. Maybe they'll, develop some of those things. But really, it kind of works the other way. I mean, I think most people know the feeling of getting more done when you're busy, being better able to do things if you have if you constantly have something to do. So I have some friends who went on Erasmus in France this on in third year, and they were sort of shocked at how much work they had there because the university they happened to go to was a very rigorous one, and they actually found that in some ways they ended up doing more sort of partying and drinking because they had all day where they were locked in the library doing their work and they needed to do their work. And then going out in the evenings was a kind of celebration, something everyone did together because they were all in the hard grub of the studying together. So actually those things kind of reinforce each other. Whereas I think what's increasingly happening is that everything's dialed back and both the difficulty of the university course is dialed back, but so is the social life and it all kind of follows each other. And a lot of people, I think, look back at their time in university now and think, if someone had kept me to a deadline in first year, if someone had, just said, well, tough, you need to be able to do this, then we wouldn't all been capable for it. But now we have to kind of do that for ourselves and discover that in fourth year, where it's almost too late. But then, you haven't developed those habits and you haven't developed that dynamic between social life and work life, because you've always been indulged. In any time you said that things were too hard, you would just be kind of reinforced in that and given help.
Indeed, indeed. I'm just wondering, because obviously in the UK in the late 90s, we had tuition fees that students have to pay. And I don't know the funding situation when it comes to universities in Denmark or Ireland, but I imagine it's something very similar. How has that affected has that affected that dynamic between the students and their lecturers in terms of dealing with this? Because now it's a student paying you, so they're basically almost a customer now. So if you start saying, no, no, I don't want to do this, some students might say, actually, I might back out of this because it's too difficult. And as a result of that, if a student backs out, you're not going to get the funding, like their payment and so on and so forth. So has that changed the dynamic in the sense that the universities want to walk that tight line between, yes, they need to be tougher, but if we get rid of too many students, we're going to have a real funding problem?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of it was what I was saying earlier as well about the I guess satisfaction and the way universities are trying to market themselves to new students. I actually think it's often for them less about the whether the current students are sort of having a perfect experience. It's more about making sure that that is kind of reinforced and that a new cohort of students will always be coming in. But something I've always found interesting about, especially the UK system, is that much as you have tuition fees and people are paying, it is all, if you have a wealthy family, then they will pay for you uni. If you don't have the means to go to uni and pay for it sort of off the bat, then there are very elaborate loan schemes, as far as I understand it, that mean that you don't as a student directly feel the price off the bat of the degree that you're taking. So I think it creates this very strange dynamic where the university is incentivized to draw students to the university because they need students to pay the fees. I think it's done some damage to kind of international versus national domestic students, because universities are increasingly incentivized to draw international students rather than domestic students because they get more money from international students. But the students themselves don't actually act as if they need their money's worth. So I think a lot of students who are kind of paying their own tuition fees, or in Dublin, those who live 2 hours away from campus because they still live at home and they live in a different county and they can't afford rent in Dublin, those are the people who actually, become disappointed and become frustrated with the fact that university seems to be watered down because they really feel like they're not getting what they've paid for. Whereas I think most students aren't actually in that situation, especially in Britain, because they aren't directly feeling. So it skews. The university is basically just looking to give the students a good time for 4 years, because the students are basically view going to university as a rite of passage, something you kind of have to do and kind of have to take the financial hit of at this point, which I think definitely changes how everyone is trying to appeal to each other and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it just seems very patronizing. I don't know about you, but if I was a student and that someone had done to me, I'd be furious in a sense. And it almost seems this paternalistic, almost patronizing effect that it's having on students. And I imagine, like I said, some students might like it, some students don't. But surely there must come a point for even those students who, initially in the first year, who don't feel that effect, come the third year, they must say, okay, we need to start getting our work done now.
Yes, I think so. I mean, some like me are deeply, deeply annoyed by it. So annoyed that we write a long letter on Liberty about it. But I think most people have this sense that they don't need it. They're not annoyed, or that they're kind of annoyed by it. They think it's a bit patronizing to them. But then they think, oh, but someone else might need this. Someone else might be happy that there is help to have, that there's a well-being tea that you can go to. And that kind of skews people's view a little bit. They think, well, I'm strong enough to deal with the hardship of academic life and whatever life throws at me. But other people might need this. So there's not an incentive to change the thing that everyone is kind of annoyed at, because people think, well, I can just ignore it and other people can. But really, it fundamentally changes the university experience for everyone, because it means that your professors are less likely and basically get I mean, I've talked to some professors who say that they get kind of whole schemes on how to teach in a way that isn't too critical of the students. So how do you run a seminar without criticizing the students? Which is incredibly counterproductive in a situation where students are reading less and less prepared for class, and then the professors are not allowed to tell them that they're being idiots and need to get their shit together. So I think that really, it is actually changing the university experience for everyone and making it worse for everyone. But people aren't so keen on pointing it out because they don't want to be the ones who roll back quote mental health support for everyone.
I'm just wondering, so you talked about the ways in which like lecturers and professors will placate the students who say something from mental health in regards to giving them extensions for assignments, and they might do the same for exams as well. But what other ways do they placate like the students who have mental health? Because you list some of them in the letter of liberty, and some of them I thought were just very, very odd.
Yeah, so I think you have, I guess, two different t strands of it. So you have what the professors do, which is very much, the extension stuff. It's not, it's things you kind of know from primary school, like the compliment sandwich. Say something positive, then say something negative, and then say something positive again. So that, this kind of thing, which really shouldn't be how you treat fully grown adults when they've written an essay. You should tell them exactly what is and is not wrong with their work. So that's kind of one side of it, and that's the professors. And this is also where you have various schemes where they're told how to teach and this kind of thing. The other side of things is kind of the administrative side. So you have these very big sort of well-being schemes. You have the well-being teas. I think I bring up the well-being alpacas in Oxford, which were a whole story a few years ago, where Oxford brought a horde of alpacas onto campus in order to be petted by the students if they were feeling stressed. Of course, they were so noisy that they were disrupting people's exam study, so that kind of backfired a little bit. You also have in the US, you have schools where and you also have this in the UK, but schemes that kind of interfere in the immediate social lives of students. So there was a kind of no contact orders thing where you can get, if someone is initially it was for sexual assault cases. So if you'd been sexually assaulted by someone, you would get a no contact order for them so that you wouldn't be put in the same classes as them. But this was kind of slowly expanded to include things like a roommate you fell out with, who you can now put on a list, and then if you're put in the same class, you can complain about it. So you're asking the university bureaucracy to step into disputes between ex-boyfriend, ex-couples, to step in between ex-roommates, this kind of thing. So it becomes students are asking the university bureaucracy to come in and mediate their everyday lives. In Britain and in Ireland, they have similar things, but at my university, it's called the Dignity, Respect and Consent Service, which all sounds very good. But it's this body where you can bring a complaint to them if you feel you have been harassed or bullied or sexually assaulted, which is not a legal body. So it's not actually accusing someone of committing a crime. It is accusing someone of making you feel uncomfortable. And then you go through sort of a protracted process where you try to work out, where some administrators sitting down and mediating between two people, where none of them have done anything that's worse than none of them have done anything you would bring to the police. So the university shouldn't be involved in this in the first place, but it is kind of justified as a way of making students feel like something is being done about their complaints. And it develops this relationship between the student and the university, where the university is the sort of is a product, and the student is a consumer that complains to the bureaucracy whenever anything is wrong.
that no contact order you just explained, it sounds very discriminatory in the sense that you might not just like the look of someone and then you can just complain about them, which to me just I just find it bizarre. I mean, it's like sticks and stones and all that. It's like why not just if you don't like someone, I don't want to look, just ignore your day. I don't know why students can't do that.
Yeah, I think I mean, it kind of works on the opposite assumptions to the legal system, I think. So the legal system, if you take out a restraining order against someone, you need to have a good reason, and it needs to be, proven that they have done something wrong, for something like that to be done. I think the university bureaucracy works on the opposite assumption. They kind of err on the side of caution. So if someone reports someone for something, it is enough that the student says, this person made me feel uncomfortable in some way. And that can then trigger, this systematic response, which is then the no contact order, which again is not a legal thing. It's just an internal university kind of system. And then you can once once you've done that, then if someone breaks your no contact order in the university, then it might actually be taken to a legal thing. But I think you're right that the university ends up just indulging anyone's sort of impulses about, oh, this guy is a bit creepy, or oh, this like person, I don't like the look of this guy. And then you can kind of wrap it in this language of discomfort and fear, and then the university will take you seriously, even though they very much shouldn't. And they should be sticking, kind of butting out of anything really that is only to do with the interpersonal relations of the students.
I know you said it's expanded from no sexual contact to something else, just looking at someone, for instance. But I'm just wondering if someone was to leave university, be thrown out of university because of non-contact orders, and none of them are to do like with any like sexual contact, but to do with like for example, I've had a falling out with someone. I imagine if you go in a wider world with your CV and there's a gap where you should have completed university, trying to explain that to an employer, oh, it's because of a non-contact order, they're automatically going to think it's to do with like sexual contact because they might not understand the actual wide definition of that, and that has real
Yeah.
serious.
So I think generally you can't be thrown out of the university for a no contact order. The thing it will come up on is kind of your your non-academic student record. So there's kind of, it'll say, as you say, some people, it kind of depends on what kind of search you do. And this is again, it's all unclear. Because it's not legal or it's not regulated in any kind of way, it is unclear where this information can be seen by employers or other things. But you're right, if there's only just one sentence on the thing and it says, non-academic, a non-academic infraction or something, then employers can kind of draw their own conclusions about what something like that might be. And it's kind of unclear. I think with the no contact orders at this university, it was very much an administrative thing where the university was dealing with it on the spot. Like it was just making sure that people weren't in the same classes or weren't in the same societies. But it can really, you can imagine this being very like you might not even know that someone's taken out a no contact order against you. So there was someone who was interviewed in the Wall Street Journal article about this, who sort of the way she discovered that someone had a no contact order against them was that she tried to enroll in a course or sign up for a society and then was told, well, you can't because this person is there and they have a no contact order against you. And that's kind of how you find out. And, it might not even have been a conflict you recognized as bad enough that such an order should happen. So the universities aren't, the universities are just trying to make sure that fewer people complain, but it ends up having this effect of making everyone really anxious and nervous about each other because you might do something that could trigger them reporting you to the university authorities in this way.
That sounds like a non-crime hate incident that we have in the UK. I know they're thinking of abolishing them now, but and I know from the work I do as well, when you look at people's DBS like police checks, and you just like something like that comes up, and you're thinking, what's that for? And I because I know the research history, I look at it thinking we'll get a bit skeptical sometimes, but someone else may not. Um, I mean, that's a stain to have on anyone, and once you have that stain, that stigma is very hard to remove.
Yeah, I think it's very much like non-crime hate incidents. I also think it's kind of Kafkaesque in the same way, in that, if someone has taken out if someone has reported you to one of these bodies, right, and you then go to and they then, I guess, come to you and interview you, the administrators, and they say, did you do this to this person? And you say, yes, but that's not illegal. There's nothing wrong. Like, I'm allowed to do that. And they then say, oh, well, but that is but they were discomfited by that, and you say yes, but I didn't do anything wrong. You can kind of go back and forth in this, like, even if you admit that you did the thing, it's not there's nothing wrong officially with doing that thing. I mean, a non-crime, it's not a crime. So if the police come to your door and say you committed a non-crime hate incident, or you look up on your own record and see that you have a non-crime hate incident, you can kind of say, well, yes, I did that, but clearly it's not illegal. So why am I going through all this? Why is anything supposed to happen? And in universities, these processes can take 6 to 8 months, where you're going to various meetings with people and being sort of interviewed and questioned, and witnesses can be brought in. I mean, it's a kind of little uh, mock trial thing, but where the whole time you are aware that you haven't even done anything that's bad enough that anyone would report you to the police. So it's not, you haven't done anything that's meaningfully wrong. And that can be incredibly difficult.
You talked about Kafkaesque there. What you're describing sounds like the castle in many forms. Although I know with that book, I think that he didn't actually manage to do an ending to it, but it sounds exactly like that, where or more so actually not the castle, the trial, where you're going more into that, and it's you're just not knowing why you're in that room, and it just seems bizarre. It's almost this presumption of guilt before innocence in many of these
Mhm.
cases.
Yeah, and it's a presumption that you yourself, if you made someone else uncomfortable, are happy to be punished for that. That you accept the premise that someone else's discomfort should lead to kind of you accepting this kind of self-flagellating process where you admit guilt. I know sometimes people are asked to, the punishment is like writing a long, groveling apology letter, or there are kind of various things that you can be made to do. And it just, I mean, you have to go along with it, because otherwise proper disciplining can incur. But it's a very strange dynamic.
As you said at the start, your letter of liberty is titled "The Tyranny of of Mental Wellbeing," especially in universities. But how much did COVID and the lockdowns associated that affect students and their mental health? Because that would have had an effect, I imagine.
Yeah, I think this is one of the key strange things about the well-being bureaucracy, is that you would think that something as massive as COVID, something like, oh, let's lock all the students in their rooms for 2 years, would would send alarm bells ringing in a university that was sort of obsessed with student well-being. But that doesn't really happen. And what instead happens is that they kind of lock all the students up, and in order to deal with the well-being problems, they take away the exams, they uh, t change everything. They sort of let the students pass, in schools. They let students get into universities on their predicted grades. So they kind of took away any criteria, but then sort of that's how we'll deal with the mental health crisis. But obviously we see that kids dealt terribly with being sort of idle for 2 years and not socializing, and being locked in their rooms. And I think we're only just, I feel like we're emerging now from, in the younger generations, from this kind of COVID slump that everyone's kind of been in for a couple of years after as well. And now people are starting to re-find their center of gravity. But I think that COVID and the way that was dealt with is, in a way, the way the university wellbeing bureaucracy deals with problems already. It just takes away things. It doesn't view, what students need really is some structure and some discipline and some guidance uh, towards kind of moving on. And COVID took all that away, and so does, the university bureaucracy in general. It allows you, I mean, some of the consequences of COVID in universities have been that more lecturers are encouraged to do lecture recordings, which means that students can increasingly stay away from class and watch the lectures online. There are so many kind of hangovers, so many now digital systems that students and professors are encouraged to use, which really have the opposite effect because students need to get out of their rooms, students need to go to class, students need that kind of forced socializing that they get when they show up to the lecture hall and engage in real time with students and professors. But yeah, it is very strange that the university that is so obsessed with well-being doesn't actually seem to listen to what works and doesn't seem to actually, when it comes down to it, worry that much about the students' well-being in the short term. Because then you would have had university administrators yelling from the rooftops that the university shouldn't be shut down.
Yeah, it just seems bizarre, like the way they dealt with that in a sense, and just like I say, shut people in there and just continue to do lectures online. I mean, me personally, if that had happened to me, I'd be bored out of my mind more than anything, and especially because you don't even have any stimulation outside of that, like the lectures. You can't, because obviously there was restrictions in terms of how long to go outside for a walk and walking a dog and whatnot. So it must have been a terrible time. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you know you have to still pay the full tuition fees?
I
Um,
believe so, yeah. Um, yeah, I don't think, and the universities curiously didn't think that the students were losing any value add, not least because the university views their job, I think, increasingly as giving students diplomas that will get them into certain kinds of jobs, rather than giving them an education that will benefit them in the long run. So the universities kind of acted as if we just lower the standards, if we just take away the exams or take away some coursework or inflate the grades a little bit, then there'll be no difference to the students because the students will still be getting the same grades and the same things. But obviously that's not the case. And the grades have always, been the measure, not the means. And I think that's something that COVID really, really laid bare. What the universities think they are giving students is not an education, is not necessarily anything other than a student experience and a diploma at the end that will allow them to enter a certain kind of middle class life, which is increasingly not the case. I mean, we had one session at the Battle of Ideas this year on downwardly mobile graduates, and everything points to the fact the university graduates are increasingly not getting the jobs that they think they will get.
well, yeah, I mean, even when I went to university, 25 years ago, I think now is the case because more and more people are going to university. So the value of the degree was actually decreasing as a result of that. Whereas 20 years before that, there was less people doing degrees. And so it's like gold, like it's valuable because it's rare. And now's the way that degrees worked as well. Um, so that's always been a problem, even before like the current times we're living as well. Obviously, you said you're originally from Denmark and you're studying in Ireland. I'm just wondering, is this a UK or an Ireland problem more so than a European problem, or is it as bad in Europe?
I think it is more prevalent in the UK and Ireland, and I'm not exactly sure why. I think continental schools have different problems. I think they're more professional. Everything is very much guided towards the workplace. One of the reasons I left Denmark was that, a degree in any given subject will be very much guided towards going into work in that field, not so much the academic side of things, which is what I really value and enjoy. Um, but it doesn't to the same extent have the problem of the declining standards or the lowering or the sort of, I guess, this kind of well-being bureaucracy in Denmark. One of the reasons for this, I think, is that it's very common to take 2 or 3 or 4 gap years before you go to university and, travel, work, all that. And then once you're ready, you go to university. But that means that university is a much less all-consuming thing. People kind of go to university in order to get a degree, in order to get a certain kind of job. And university isn't your whole life. Whereas one of the things that is both good and bad about the UK and the system in Ireland is that most people start just after school. And once you move there, your whole life is in the university environment. I mean, in Ireland, you can get a job on campus. Your social life largely runs through the various societies. So I'm a part of the hiking society, but people join societies and everything works within the framework of the university. And the university therefore thinks it's its job to take care of every single aspect of your well-being. Whereas I think in Europe, you're a little bit more likely to view the university as your place of study, and then kind of the rest of the world outside that is different. Your social life is somewhere else, or at least it's not institutionalized. It goes on. You go to your sports club, but that's not connected to the university necessarily. You go to the pub, but it's not also wrapped up in one single administrative blob.
Yeah. It sounds like from your experiences of university and what you know, university in different countries, that it sounds like they've almost become more like career advisors as opposed to actually teachers of education. Would that be a fair assessment to say, or is that going a bit too far?
Um, I think, I mean, I don't even think they are that. I think they put on kind of careers fairs, but those aren't really the professors. I think what universities really have is they've lost confidence in their own ability to teach students and make and prepare them for the real world, which is why they're just lowering the standards because they're kind of themselves they're insecure about what they're providing because they know that students are struggling to get jobs on the other side. So they think, well, better that we then give them time to have jobs or do things in their free time. I think the university still rests on the assumption that university graduates will be able to get jobs and you won't need to help them that much. Some students are proactive and get internships and do all that. But the university itself seems to just be kind of slowly stepping back academically and in terms of advice, and then pushing forward this kind of mirage of well-being, and putting that basically in the place of what it's supposed to be doing. So instead of teaching properly and all those things, it's making sure that you're having a good time and that you will look back on your university experience in a vaguely positive way. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to give you the quote unquote university experience rather than what the university is actually for.
I kind of think I know what you're going to say to this next question I'm going to ask, but in regards to debating, because I was very shy as a kid, but I love debating in that environment, even from secondary school to like university. How has this mental well-being affected debating in a sense? Because I've spoken to some people and it's affected the subjects I want to they'll debate about. Because I feel more comfortable debating certain subjects, whereas someone like me would debate everything. How has it affected that part of like not just the lectures, but also any debating societies around university?
I think it's encouraged a very personal way for all students to think about themselves. So everything you do is framed in terms of what effects it has on your comfort and well-being and that at all times. So you're always analyzing your experience through that lens. I think that means that debating societies increasingly, instead of um, kind of considering themselves a part of civil society, a part of the fabric, debating important things that are blowing up in society within a university environment. They view their job as kind of a mix between entertainment and then making students kind of feel good about any given topic. So I think this has kind of watered down what debate means, and debate becomes incredibly performative in universities. I think a lot of the time it's much more jokey, and then it sort of shies away from dealing with the central tensions in society. So I think one of the great examples of this is that there are obviously a lot of American students who come to Irish and UK universities. and 50% of the American population at least voted for Donald Trump. But the assumption is that Americans that you meet will be anti-Trump, and that they will have to sort of basically apologize for being American. And you create this safe space within the university where everyone can kind of make assumptions about what other people believe and how they interact with the world without having to face people out there, the people out there who think differently, who voted a lunatic into the American White House and that kind of thing. So I think it very much stifles the culture of the university because it doesn't view itself as kind of training people to go out into the real world. It views itself as basically protecting them from the world outside. And I think this infuses student culture, which I think is incredibly incurious about what other people believe. I don't think there's anything wrong with university students being overwhelmingly liberal, but I think there's a lack of curiosity about why larger and larger swaths of the population outside the university don't agree with them.
You say there's nothing wrong with students being overly liberal, but isn't it a problem in the sense of if you had, say, a high percentage of, say, not just conservatives, but like professors that are more conservative as well? Because from the polls I've read, the majority of lecturers, unless I'm wrong, tend to be more left-wing liberal than conservative. So therefore, isn't that an issue in regards to you're going to provide less pushback? Because otherwise, you're just going to have this, like say, a bubble where everyone's just agreeing with each other, and it's just not you're not moving the conversation forward. Sometimes you need a grenade to like mess everything up, in a figurative sense, not literal, obviously. But yeah,
Yeah, I think the what's needed is not so much because I mean people have been talking about basically affirmative action for conservative university professors, which I think is probably the wrong path to go down. In that what we want in universities, especially in the sciences and things like that, is that we want people who are very, very good at it, irrespective of their politics. And I think what's happened in the university over the last 10 or 20 years is that it's become the norm that no matter what you're studying, you would also be liberal. And I think that's created a stifling atmosphere. I mean, you see things like DEI statements when you're applying for posts in universities that kind of, even as you're applying, you have to say that you believe in certain kind of progressive values. And I think all those things are very bad and should be gotten rid of. But at the end of the day, I don't want my university professors to be 50-50 liberal and conservative. I don't want political positions to be kind of equally represented, but I want the people who are there to be open to one student or one professor who isn't. I want there to be a culture where just because fewer people are of a certain belief about something. Because I, at the end of the day, don't believe that political positions fall on a kind of 50-50 spectrum where you can
yeah,
place yourself somewhere and then as long as everyone's equally represented, that's fine. I mean, I don't think that's how politics works. I don't think it's how politics should work. So what I want is that there to be openness to minority positions. I want people who fall outside the norms of the academic uh, majorities to be welcome and be seen as interesting additions to the university culture rather than nuisances and problems to be dealt with.
yeah, indeed. So this is be a long answer because there's a lot to go through. But how do we solve this issue? Like, what things can be put in place to solve it, or is it just a case of letting nature take its course? Because, like I said, this has been going on for about 20 years. So, so how do we get out of this mire of like mental well-being, making people more resilient, and so on and so forth?
Um, I think so. I'm fine. I guess I think of it in a few different strands. Like there are a few different battles to be fought on campus. One of them is the free speech battle, the kind of academic free speech battle. How do we get past this stifling culture of academic discourse and open it up? And I've actually found that even I'm kind of approached as another complaint. So if I go to my administration and say, I think we have a lack of political culture, I want to do something about it, they kind of they say, do you need well, oh, I'm sorry to hear that you feel left out. And then they analyze that as if I'm complaining about my well-being because I'm not sort of welcome. So that becomes a whole thing. So I think really what needs to be done is that you need to kind of you need to point out that universities right now are kind of throwing a lot more money into these administrative and largely fake well-being initiatives. And you need to kind of take the funding out of that and put it back into academic subjects, make academic positions less precarious, and recalibrate what the value add is of the university, and say that any funding should be taken away from these kind of extra things and into the academic side of university life. But I fundamentally believe that it's a political battle. Like, you need to, within the university, point out that none of this well-being stuff is neutral. It's not politically neutral, but it's also not. I think a lot of people think, well, what's the harm? And I think you have to point out and what the harm is and how it affects students' view of themselves, the balance of authority in the university. And then I think you just have to, build coalitions within the university. And I'm very happy there's a lot of external focus on this. A lot of people are, especially on Twitter, but also in the mainstream press, writing about all the problems in universities. I think people need to be more willing to take those battles inside the university. I think one of the trends of especially students, but also academics, is that they're a lot braver on the internet and in the mainstream press than they are in committee meetings and council meetings and within the sphere of the university. So it creates this imbalance between what people are willing to say publicly and what they're willing to say in their jobs. So I think there are things like Academics for Academic Freedom and some of these groups, Committee for Academic Freedom, that are bringing together professors and making them a little braver and a little more able to stand up to some of these things together. And I think students need to do that too. I think students need to stop kind of ignoring it and saying, oh, well, it's fine, it's over there, and really start writing angry articles about it in the student newspaper, sending emails to the administration, building groups that go up against it, and stop viewing it as neutral. I really think that's the crucial thing. And academics and students need to kind of go together to run up against this.
I mentioned some of this at the start of the interview, but if people want to find your work, where else can they go to?
So I Substack at Inside Basbøll, then I have a Twitter where I tweet about various things. And yeah, then you can sometimes see my name pop up in the Critic and UnHerd, but that's about it. I think subscribing to my Substack is really the way of figuring out what I'm up to.
Cool. I'll leave a link to your Substack in the description here, so people can have a click on it and have a look. Felice Basbøll, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I know you actually did a session about of ideas a couple of weeks ago, and that went very well, so I'm happy about that. But again, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.